Earlier this week, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, who you're seeing there, had to explain inflation, which is still high. Not as bad as it was early this year, but it is still a concern. And his concern, what he thinks is causing it, is workers' wages being too high, and something needs to be done about that. Now, the fact that corporations' profits are absolutely off the chart, that's not worthy of consideration, not a big deal, doesn't need to be restrained. But anyway, 263,000 new jobs have been added. Again, that's not the concern. The concern is the wages. And so he had this to say about the issue of out of control wage increases. In the labor market, demand for workers far exceeds the supply of available workers, and nominal wages have been growing at a pace well above what would be consistent with 2% inflation over time. Thus, another condition we are looking for is the restoration of balance between supply and demand in the labor market, which is like it's so vague that maybe that doesn't really resonate, but that is ominous. They mean they're gonna be targeting workers and doing literally anything they can to drive down wage increases, to stop this situation, this untenable situation where workers have more power to dictate the conditions of their work than they've had in recent history. Something needs to be done about that. He's being a little bit vague about what they're gonna do, but it is ominous all the same. And here's the crazy thing. Wages have kind of gone up a little bit recently. I mean, we're coming out of the chaos of the pandemic. We've lost over 1 million people. Who's surprised to find out that there are less workers competing for the same wages. But honestly, when you look at a chart, let's bring up the chart now, you'll see that while hourly compensation has gone up a bit over literally the past 2 decades, it is still being dwarfed in scale by productivity. So workers are getting paid a little bit more representative a share of what they're producing, but it is still nothing compared to the value of their work. And that obviously is not something that Jerome Powell is gonna focus on, just the wages and how they need to be reined in.
So I'm going to decipher 2 quotes from Powell for you guys that's amazing and tells you all you need to know about the people in power in this country. But first, that's my favorite graph in the world.
I know.
Okay, and that's in my new book that's gonna come out very soon, September. But if you'd like to pre-order it, God bless your heart, justicescomingbook.com. The links are always in the description box. But the reason why that's such an amazing chart is that I'll give you one fact, I'll give you a spoiler from the book. That means that they took $17,000 a year from the average American worker every year. That you were that productive, but instead of giving it to you, as I show in the book, it went straight to corporate profits. That is the chart that shows the great American robbery. Can you imagine if you had $17,000 more every single year? And if your wages had kept up with productivity before the corporations took over the Supreme Court, you would have had it. And you did have it. Look at it. And the reason why that chart is so telling is because we didn't always have income inequality. We actually had a great system until 1978, and the right wing brought in their literal activist judges, and they called them activist judges, to take over the Supreme Court and allow bribery. And so that way corporations could bribe all the politicians, and that's the hole that we find ourselves in. And that's why there's no one to fight back for you guys, at least certainly among corporate politicians, Democrats and Republicans alike, when Powell says things like this. So let me decipher for you. So one of the things he said is, quote, significant and persistent labor supply shortfall opened up during the pandemic, a shortfall that appears unlikely to fully close anytime soon. So they speak in these terms partly because, hey, look, those are economic terms and that's what they're used to, and they all live in that world. But partly to confuse you guys, because if they spoke clearly, you'd be 10,000 times angrier. What does it mean to have a significant and persistent labor supply shortfall? That means there's not enough workers. There's a labor supply shortfall, like not enough workers, and there's too much demand. Well, okay, for people that need to be hired. So what does that mean? Number one, that means other than inflation, you got a kick-ass economy, okay? Because we're at basically full employment, and we're past full employment. They can't fill the jobs they need to fill, okay? And so number one, Biden's a loser. You should be taking credit for that every single day. God damn it, my economy's so hot. that we've got an inflation problem because we're at full employment. But he's an idiot, he doesn't do that, et cetera. That's a small part of it, right? But the bigger part of it is they're saying, we got too many of you guys that we don't have enough of you guys. And so we wind up having to pay you more, and we don't want to pay you more. Because anyone who's taken Econ 101 knows the prices where supply and demand meet, right? And since there's a lower supply, it's driving up your wages. And Powell is saying that is terrible. Why is that terrible? It's great for me and you, right? But for the people that are in charge of our government, the idea of you having higher wages is a problem for them. Why? Because they hate you? No, it's not like a cabal. They're not like weirdo, evil people in a pizza shop or anything like that. No, they just think, well, that'll drive up inflation. Well, but it doesn't have to. The corporations could actually shoulder some of the pain that comes with that. And that's how it worked in a normal economy in the past. Some of the costs would be passed on to you guys. Some of the costs would be eaten by the companies. Why would they eat the cost? Because there's too much competition. They'd lose too many customers if they increase prices too much. But they've set up oligopolies and monopolies because they've captured the government. So now the amount of companies in the last 30 years or so has shrunk to half the size. So there's so many less public companies now because the giant companies have set up all of these oligopolies, where that means just a couple of companies that run the whole market. Then they do price fixing, so you have no choice at all. So they're still driving up prices. That's what's causing the inflation, right? And so, but Powell never ever talks about companies and their record profits. Now, if you got a steaming hot economy that's so hot that it's causing inflation, and then at the same exact time as you're gonna see, corporate profits are at an unbelievable record high. Any rational government official would say, well, obviously corporations are getting a windfall here, right? And you could have different ideas of what to do with that windfall, but they would say that would be a big part of what they want to address. Instead, Powell focused on the labor supply shortfall because he wants to blame it on the workers.
Yeah.
And again, not because he's evil, but because everyone that is at that level just assumes that. That's how they think, that's their group thing. Goddamn workers getting paid too much. And by increasing interest rates, you know what he's trying to do? He's trying to drive down your wages. And then he figures, oh, that's how we're gonna get control of inflation. Unbelievable. But now, second shocking part of this, and John, you said everybody kind of knows this. I have to confess that I hadn't thought of the scale of this. So let me quote here. The second, and this is WSWS.org that I'm quoting from. The second factor was the slower growth in the working age population due to a combination of, now I'm quoting back to Powell, quote, plunge in net immigration. Wait, what? I thought we had open borders.
Yeah.
I thought everybody was coming in. Net immigration is going down under Biden.
But what about the Great Replacement?
Okay, none of that is true. None of that is true. Here's the head of the Federal Reserve saying the problem is we don't have enough immigrants. Okay, so that's point one in the second factor here. And then he says, plunge in net immigration and a surge in deaths during the pandemic, probably accounting for 1.5 million missing workers. So many people died during COVID that's part of the reason why we have a labor shortage, because they died. Meanwhile, the Republicans are like, who cares about masks and vaccines? Everybody get back in the assembly lines, and oops, you guys drove them back to the assembly lines. A lot of them caught COVID because you told them not to take precautions. They died, and now you're missing 1.5 million workers. Okay, so that's what's actually happening. And by the way, guys, the quotes that I read are direct quotes from Powell. I'm not the one saying it, he's the one saying it.
Yeah.
But they say it in gobbledygook so that, and the reporters are all part of this. Again, they're not evil, they're just used to the groupthink of, well, of course, the problem is wages. And I haven't seen anybody report about how corporate profits are at a record and it's outrageous and it's contributing to inflation. Find me an op-ed that says that. Maybe they'll let one progressive on out of like hundreds and hundreds of op-eds written saying, no, it's the goddamn workers, it's the workers' problem, it's the wages are too high. That's because it's not, mainstream media is corporate media. They're multi-billion-dollar corporations themselves, and where do they get all their money? Two sources. Other multi-billion-dollar corporations that do ads and the corruption in politics. politicians give them $17 billion every election. They did in the last midterm, and to cover up the corruption, and that's where all of the money goes.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of like a very small scale version of the political and economic reorganization and chaos that followed like the Black Plague. Like how you had like the system of government, the organization of the economy in European countries fundamentally changed because so many people had died in such a short period of time, and the balance of power between classes changed as a result of it. Obviously, this is a much smaller percentage, but when you combine that with the immigration changes and other things, we're seeing, I think, a version of it. Anyway, as you pointed out, yeah, the profits are out of control. US Commerce Department's Bureau of Economic Analysis reported non-financial sector corporate profits of $2.08 trillion during the third quarter. That's up from $1.9 trillion through the same period last year. Yeah, second quarter profits, 2.07 trillion. Now that may seem high, but it's important to note that is not high enough for them to ever lower prices, literally ever. And by the way, when it comes to price gouging, it is crazy that Biden and other politicians aren't using this, the quote I'm about to read you, as the rationale for some sort of bill to stop the corporate price gouging, some sort of windfall profits tax. This is Darren Woods, CEO of ExxonMobil, who said, "I'm optimistic that with time, the market, and we've proven this, I think, over the years, that the markets will come back into balance. But it is a function of time. I think in the short term, everyone will squeeze what they can." And the financial chief of PepsiCo said on his own company's third quarter earnings call that his company is, quote, "capable of taking whatever pricing we need."
And those are not the only two. We've read other quotes from other corporations earlier, where almost all of them, because they have they have to be honest in their earnings call, otherwise they could be sued. And two, they like to brag in their earnings call about how much money they're making, so the executives can get higher bonuses. So they go on there and they're like, because of inflation, we've used it as an excuse to drive up prices and nobody's stopping us, right? And so almost every executive is bragging to no end about how they're taking advantage of inflation.
Yep.
And because there is no government left. Guys, last thing, to give you a sense of how unbelievable the corporate profits are. So just 3 years ago in 2019, the third quarter profits were 1.37 trillion. Let's round up and call it 1.4. It's gonna make easy math. And John just told you this year was 2.08 trillion. So let's round that up to 2.1, right? So 1.4 and 2.1 in just 3 years. That's a 50% increase in profits, and that was already a record. A 50%. Guys, from the business world, a 50% increase in profits is not a little. It's gigantic.
Yep.
In just 3 years. Gee, I wonder what's driving up prices. And yet, the only one saying it is Bernie Sanders and the Justice Democrats.
Yeah.
And every other Democrat in Washington is covering corporate ass when they could have won the elections, by the way. If they talked about price gouging, exit polls indicated that price gouging made voters furious. And of the voters that were concerned about inflation, that in the elections voted mainly against Democrats, if they had tackled price gouging, most of those guys said they hate price gouging. They would have loved an attack against price gouging by corporations and big business. They could have easily kept the House, but they serve their corporate donors, and the mainstream media, corporate media, keeps that from you religiously. So you never know that the Democrats are just the good cop and the good cop, bad cop game the corporations play to screw you over.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.